He thought humiliating her would be easy, but he had no idea he was about to unravel everything he had built in front of a silent room that would never forget what they were about to witness. The marble floors of Langford Grand Boutique reflected the afternoon light like polished glass, each step echoing with quiet authority as Emily Carter walked through the entrance, her soft sneakers barely making a sound against the pristine surface, her simple cotton blouse and faded jeans standing in stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer heels that filled the space. Yet there was something in the way she carried herself, steady, composed, unbothered, that didn't quite match the way. People glanced at her and quickly looked away, already deciding who she was before she even spoke a word. She paused near a display of handcrafted handbags, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the leather, not with hesitation but with familiarity, as if she had seen finer things and simply chose not to wear them. But to everyone watching, she was just another outsider who didn't belong. And across the room, Victoria Langford noticed her instantly. Victoria didn't need an introduction. Her presence alone shifted the air, the subtle hush of employees straightening their posture, the faint smiles that followed her movements like shadows, her heels clicking with precise confidence as she turned her gaze toward Emily, her lips curling ever so slightly, not in curiosity, but in quiet amusement, the kind that comes from someone who believes the world has already sorted people into categories, and she sits firmly at the top. She didn't approach immediately. Instead, she watched, her eyes narrowing just enough to signal intent, like a predator assessing something it didn't respect but wanted to toy with anyway. And when Emily asked a nearby associate a simple question about a custom order, Victoria's expression shifted from amusement to something sharper, something deliberate. Slowly, she began to move, her path cutting cleanly through the boutique as conversations softened around her, her voice arriving before her presence fully did, smooth but edged with something unmistakable, something meant to be heard by more than just one person. "Are we really entertaining this now?" she said, not loudly, but with enough precision that heads turned, the room subtly aligning itself toward the moment unfolding. Emily turned, her eyes calm, meeting Victoria's without flinching, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them, something that should have warned Victoria to stop, but arrogance rarely listens to quiet signals. Victoria stepped closer, her gaze traveling from Emily's shoes to her face with open judgment, a small, dismissive laugh escaping her lips as she gestured vaguely toward the boutique. "This isn't exactly the kind of place you wander into by mistake," she continued, her tone light but cutting, designed to invite others into the moment, to make it shared, public, undeniable. A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in just enough to watch without being obvious, the tension building not through noise but through stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes when something is about to cross a line. Emily didn't step back, didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply stood there, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, and that calm seemed to irritate Victoria more than any response could have, as if the lack of reaction denied her the control she expected to have. Victoria tilted her head slightly, her smile tightening, her voice lowering just enough to feel more personal while still carrying across the polished space. "People who belong here don't have to ask questions like that," she added, her words landing with quiet precision. And for a moment, the boutique held its breath, the air thick with anticipation, because somewhere deep beneath the surface, even those watching could sense it. This wasn't going to end the way Victoria expected. The faint murmur that had been floating through the boutique dissolved into a tight, uncomfortable silence as Victoria's words settled into the air, and for a moment no one moved. Not the sales associates, not the customers pretending to browse, not even the manager who stood near the register with a polite smile frozen halfway across his face, because everyone understood that something had shifted from casual arrogance into something sharper, something deliberate. Emily remained exactly where she was, her hand resting lightly against the display, her posture neither defensive nor submissive, just steady, and that stillness seemed to stretch the moment longer than Victoria had intended, as if the absence of fear or embarrassment was quietly resisting the script that Victoria had already written in her mind. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Emily more closely now, not with curiosity but with irritation, the kind that builds when someone refuses to react the way they are expected to. And she took another small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the encounter feel personal while still keeping it public. "Let me make this simple," she continued, her voice smooth but edged with impatience. "This place caters to a certain standard, and people come here expecting a certain environment." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the surrounding customers, as if inviting silent agreement. So when someone walks in looking completely out of place, it raises questions. A few people shifted their weight, one woman quietly stepping away from a nearby rack as if distance could make her invisible, while a younger associate glanced down at the floor, clearly unsure whether to intervene or disappear. And through it all, Emily said nothing, her expression unchanged, her eyes calm and focused, not on the crowd, not even on Victoria's tone, but on Victoria herself, as if she were listening to something beneath the words. That silence only sharpened Victoria's frustration, because it denied her the reaction she was building toward, and so she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel more direct while still carrying through the polished room. "People who belong here do not need to prove it," she said, each word measured, "and they certainly do not wander in hoping to be treated like they do." The statement hung there, heavy and unmistakable, and this time the silence felt different, less curious and more tense, as if everyone present understood that a line had been drawn and something irreversible was about to happen. Emily slowly lifted her hand from the display and turned fully toward Victoria, her movements unhurried, deliberate, and for the first time she spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying without effort. "I am not here to prove anything," she said, her tone even, almost gentle, and that quiet response seemed to ripple through the room in a way Victoria had not anticipated, because it did not challenge her directly. It did not escalate. It simply existed, steady and grounded, and that made it harder to dismiss. For a fraction of a second, Victoria hesitated, the smallest crack in her composure, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came, replaced by a sharper edge, a need to reassert control over a moment that was no longer unfolding the way she had planned. She straightened slightly, her expression tightening into something colder, more decisive, and the faintest smile returned to her lips, not one of amusement now, but of intention, as if she had decided that subtlety was no longer necessary, and the room seemed to sense it, the air growing heavier, the quiet stretching thinner, as every eye that had been pretending not to watch was now fully aware that whatever happened next would not be easily forgotten. Victoria's smile sharpened as she studied Emily's calm expression, and something in that quiet composure seemed to provoke her more than any argument could have, because it suggested a kind of confidence that did not ask for approval, and that was something Victoria had spent her entire life controlling in others. She let out a soft, dismissive laugh, the sound echoing just enough against the marble and glass to pull every lingering gaze tighter into the moment, and then she tilted her head slightly, as if addressing not just Emily, but the entire room. "You are not here to prove anything," she repeated, her tone laced with thinly veiled mockery. "That is convenient, because there is clearly nothing to prove." A few quiet chuckles slipped from the edges of the crowd, hesitant at first, then fading as quickly as they came when Emily did not react, her stillness turning those small sounds into something awkward, something misplaced. Victoria took another step closer, invading the last inches of space that separated them, her presence now unmistakably confrontational, and she lowered her voice just enough to make it feel personal, while still allowing every word to carry. "People like you always think confidence can replace reality," she continued, her eyes locked onto Emily's, searching for a crack, a flinch, anything that would restore her sense of control. But there was nothing, only that same steady gaze that refused to shrink. The tension stretched thin across the boutique, the kind of tension that made even the faint hum of the air conditioning feel too loud. And somewhere near the entrance, a customer shifted uneasily, the sound of a shopping bag brushing against polished tile cutting through the silence like a reminder that this had gone too far. Yet no one stepped in, no one spoke, because moments like this had a way of freezing people in place. Victoria exhaled slowly, as if making a decision, and then she straightened, her expression settling into something colder, more deliberate, the kind of expression that signaled she was no longer playing for amusement, but for dominance. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said, her voice firm now, no longer pretending to be casual. "This is not a place for people who wander in expecting special treatment simply because they decide they deserve it." And as the words landed, she made a small, dismissive gesture with her hand, the kind that was meant to reduce someone, to make them smaller in the eyes of everyone watching. For a brief second, it seemed like that might be the end of it, like the moment would dissolve into an uncomfortable memory that people would quietly carry with them. But Victoria was not finished, not when she could still feel that resistance in Emily's silence, that quiet refusal to be diminished. She leaned forward again, closer this time, her voice dropping into something almost conversational, yet carrying a sharp edge that cut through the air. "You should leave," she said, each word slow and precise, "before you embarrass yourself any further." The sentence hung there, heavy and final, and the room held its breath, waiting for Emily to react, to retreat, to break. But instead, Emily reached into her bag with calm, unhurried movements, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face, and for the first time, something shifted in the atmosphere, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a storm changes direction, because whatever Victoria expected next, it was not going to follow the path she had chosen. Emily's fingers moved calmly inside her bag, her movements unhurried, almost deliberate in their quiet precision, and for a moment the room seemed to lean in closer, drawn not by noise but by the absence of it, because there was something unsettling about how composed she remained while every eye waited for her to either retreat or react. Instead, she pulled out a simple phone, nothing flashy, no visible sign of status or wealth, just an ordinary device that looked almost out of place in the tension that had filled the boutique, and she held it loosely in her hand, her gaze never breaking from Victoria's. Victoria watched this with a faint scoff, her expression tightening as if she had expected something more dramatic, something that would justify the spectacle she had created, and when none came, her irritation deepened into something sharper. "Calling someone is not going to change where you are standing," she said, her voice carrying a colder edge now, no longer amused, but impatient, as though the entire situation had become an inconvenience she wanted resolved on her terms. A few people in the room shifted again, the quiet stretching thin, because something about Emily's calm refusal to engage had begun to shift the energy, not loudly, not obviously, but enough that even those who had silently sided with Victoria were starting to feel uncertain about how this would end. Emily did not respond immediately. She simply glanced down at the phone, tapped once, and raised it to her ear, her posture still relaxed, her voice when it came soft but steady. "I need you to come here," she said. Nothing more, no explanation, no urgency in her tone, just a simple statement that seemed almost too small for the weight it carried, and then she lowered the phone, ending the call as quietly as she had made it. The simplicity of it seemed to hang in the air longer than expected, and for a brief second, the room felt suspended between what had just happened and what might follow, a pause so complete it was almost tangible. Victoria let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head slightly, as if dismissing the entire gesture, but there was a flicker in her eyes now, something subtle, something she did not fully understand yet, because the control she had been holding onto so tightly no longer felt absolute. "This is exactly what I mean," she said, her tone sharper, her words cutting through the silence with renewed force. "People who do not belong here always think someone else will come fix their mistakes." And she gestured lightly toward the entrance, as if inviting the invisible person on the other end of that call to appear, her confidence returning in the form of dismissal. Yet even as she spoke, the room did not relax, the tension did not dissolve, because something about Emily's stillness, about the quiet certainty in that one sentence, lingered in a way that words could not easily erase. Near the far wall, a store associate glanced toward the entrance without meaning to, then quickly looked away, as if acknowledging that instinct would make the moment more real, while another customer adjusted their grip on a shopping bag, their attention no longer pretending to be elsewhere. Emily remained exactly where she was, her expression unchanged, her shoulders relaxed, her presence grounded in a way that did not match the situation around her, And in that stillness, there was something else now, something that had not been there before, not visible, not spoken, but felt, like the quiet shift before something irreversible begins. And as the seconds stretched, as the silence refused to break, even Victoria's posture adjusted ever so slightly, her confidence still present but no longer effortless, because for the first time since the moment began, she was no longer entirely certain that she was in control of how it would end. The silence stretched longer than anyone in the boutique was comfortable with, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel amplified, the faint shift of shoes against marble, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, even the subtle inhale of someone holding their breath too long. And yet no one spoke, because something had changed in a way that could not be undone. Victoria stood where she was, her posture still composed, her chin slightly raised, but the effortless confidence she had carried moments ago now felt just a fraction more rigid, as if it required intention to maintain, and her eyes flicked briefly toward the entrance before returning to Emily, unwilling to let that small movement be noticed. "You really think someone is going to come and fix this for you?" she said, her voice sharper now, no longer smooth, but edged with something closer to impatience, as though she needed to hear herself reclaim control, and a faint, polite laugh followed, though it did not quite land the way she expected. Emily did not respond. She simply stood there, her phone now resting quietly at her side, her expression unchanged, her presence grounded in a way that felt almost immovable, and that stillness seemed to press against the room, making every second feel heavier than the last. Near the back of the boutique, the manager shifted his weight again, his eyes now fixed toward the glass doors, not openly, but enough that it revealed a growing awareness that something was about to happen, something beyond the normal flow of customer interactions, and a younger associate beside him mirrored the glance, their earlier uncertainty replaced by quiet anticipation. Outside, through the tall glass panels, a dark vehicle slowed as it approached the curb, its movement smooth and deliberate, the kind of arrival that did not rush. And though it had not yet stopped, something about it drew attention, subtle at first, then more noticeable as one customer near the entrance turned slightly to look, their curiosity pulling another gaze, then another, like a ripple moving outward without sound. Victoria noticed the shift, her eyes narrowing as she followed the direction of those glances, and for the first time, her focus broke from Emily entirely, drawn instead toward the entrance, where the reflection of the vehicle now stretched across the polished floor like a dark line cutting through the light. The car came to a complete stop, its presence quiet but unmistakable, and the driver stepped out first, moving with practiced efficiency, opening the rear door with a precision that suggested routine rather than show. And in that moment, the air inside the boutique seemed to tighten again, not with tension this time, but with expectation. Victoria straightened slightly, her expression hardening as if preparing to dismiss whatever was about to unfold. But there was something in the way the room responded, the way conversations had completely ceased, the way even those who had been casually observing were now fully turned toward the entrance, that made it impossible to ignore. Emily did not turn, did not follow the gaze of the others. She remained exactly where she was, her eyes still steady, her posture unchanged, as if she already knew what was coming and had no need to confirm it. The footsteps that followed were measured, unhurried, each one echoing softly against the marble as they crossed the threshold into the boutique. And though no one spoke, the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable, like the moment a room recognizes a presence before it fully understands why. And as that presence moved closer, as the space between the entrance and the center of the room quietly closed, the balance that Victoria had controlled so easily just minutes ago began to tilt in a direction she could no longer predict. The footsteps did not rush, they did not announce themselves with urgency or force, yet each one carried a weight that seemed to settle over the room with quiet authority, drawing every eye without demanding attention. And as the man crossed fully into the boutique, the shift became undeniable, not loud, not dramatic, but precise, like a line being drawn in a place no one could ignore. He moved with a calm confidence that did not need to prove itself, his tailored suit fitting with effortless precision, his posture relaxed yet controlled, and there was something in the way the staff near the entrance instinctively straightened, their expressions sharpening into recognition before they even spoke, that signaled his presence carried meaning far beyond appearance. Victoria watched him approach, her expression tightening just slightly, the first real crack in her composure beginning to show, because while she did not yet know exactly who he was, she understood immediately that he was not someone to dismiss casually. The manager took a half step forward, then stopped, uncertain whether to greet him or remain silent, his earlier confidence replaced by careful observation, while a quiet murmur of recognition began to ripple through a few of the customers who seemed to understand more than the others. The man's gaze moved across the room once, steady and measured, taking in everything without appearing to search, until it landed on Emily, and in that instant, something shifted again, something subtle but unmistakable, as his expression softened just enough to reveal familiarity, not surprise, not concern, but recognition that carried weight. He closed the remaining distance without hesitation, his steps still unhurried, and when he stopped beside her, the room seemed to hold its breath again, waiting for something to break the silence. Emily turned slightly toward him, her calm still intact, and for the first time since the moment began, there was the faintest change in her expression, not relief, not distress, just a quiet acknowledgement that what needed to happen next was already understood between them. "You came," she said softly, her voice steady, and though the words were simple, they carried a meaning that reached further than anyone present could fully grasp. He nodded once, his eyes briefly meeting hers before shifting toward Victoria, and the transition was immediate, his calm presence sharpening into something more defined, not aggressive, not raised, but firm in a way that required no explanation. "I did," he replied, his voice low and even, carrying across the room without effort. And then he turned fully, his attention settling on Victoria with a focus that made the space feel smaller, more contained. Victoria straightened instinctively, her posture adjusting as if preparing for a conversation she had not expected to have, her earlier confidence now tempered by uncertainty, and when she spoke, her voice was still controlled, but no longer effortless. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, though the question lacked the authority it had carried just minutes before. The man regarded her for a brief moment, not with hostility, but with a level of clarity that stripped away the performance of the situation, and when he spoke again, his tone remained calm, but there was something in it that shifted the balance completely. "I believe there is," he said, his words measured, precise, and final in a way that did not need emphasis, and as they settled into the silence, it became clear to everyone in the room that whatever control Victoria had held over the moment had quietly, completely, slipped away. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality that no one could ignore, and for a brief moment, Victoria simply stared at him, her expression carefully composed yet undeniably strained beneath the surface, as if she were trying to recalibrate her understanding of a situation that had shifted too quickly for her to control. "I am not sure I understand what you are implying," she replied, her tone measured, still attempting to hold on to the authority she had wielded so easily before, but the subtle hesitation in her voice betrayed something new, something unfamiliar, doubt. The man did not raise his voice, did not step closer, did not need to, because his presence alone now carried the weight of the moment, and when he spoke again, it was with a calm clarity that cut through any attempt to redirect the narrative. "I am not implying anything," he said evenly, his gaze steady. "I am addressing what has already happened." The simplicity of the statement left no room for interpretation, and a faint ripple moved through the room as those watching began to fully understand that this was no longer a social exchange, but something far more consequential. Victoria straightened slightly, her chin lifting as she attempted to recover, her eyes flicking briefly toward the manager as if expecting support. But the manager remained still, his earlier neutrality now replaced by a careful distance, unwilling to align himself with either side until the situation revealed its true weight. "If there has been a misunderstanding," Victoria continued, her words chosen with precision, "I am sure it can be resolved without unnecessary escalation." And there it was, the first attempt to soften the situation, to reframe it into something manageable, something she could still influence. The man regarded her for a moment, not dismissing her, not interrupting, simply allowing the words to settle before responding. And when he did, his tone remained composed, but carried a quiet authority that shifted the ground beneath her again. "There is no misunderstanding," he said, "and there will be no need for escalation if accountability is understood." The phrase lingered, its meaning clear without needing to be explained, and for the first time, Victoria's confidence faltered in a way that could not be hidden behind posture or tone. Around them, the room had gone completely still, every observer now fully engaged, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition that they were witnessing something that rarely unfolded so openly. The man turned slightly toward Emily then, his expression softening just enough to acknowledge her presence again, and his voice lowered, though it still carried through the silence. "Are you all right?" he asked, not as a question seeking validation, but as a quiet confirmation of something already known. Emily gave a small nod, her composure unchanged, her voice calm. "I am fine," she replied, and that brief exchange, simple as it was, seemed to reinforce everything that had already shifted, because it was no longer about what had happened, but about what would follow. The man turned back to Victoria, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, and the balance in the room had now completely reversed, not through force, not through volume, but through something far more precise, clarity. And as the silence stretched once more, it became evident to everyone present that whatever came next would not be decided by who spoke louder, but by who understood the weight of their actions. Victoria's composure held for only a fraction longer before. Something in the man's presence forced a deeper realization to surface, not sudden, not dramatic, but slow and undeniable, like a truth she could no longer ignore. And as she studied him more closely, the subtle details began to align, the precision of his suit, the quiet recognition from the staff, the shift in the room that had not been commanded but instinctively given, and then it landed, not in a single moment, but in a series of small, unmistakable confirmations that built into something she could not dismiss. Her expression changed, just slightly at first, the confidence in her eyes tightening into calculation, her posture adjusting as if trying to correct a misstep that had already gone too far, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, one that was carefully measured, but no longer certain. "May I ask who you are?" she said, the question framed politely, but carrying an urgency she could not fully conceal. The room seemed to lean in again, the silence returning not as tension this time, but as anticipation, because those who had already begun to recognize him understood what that question meant and what the answer would change. He did not respond immediately. He simply held her gaze for a brief moment, as if weighing whether the answer was necessary, and then, without shifting his posture or raising his voice, he spoke with the same calm clarity that had defined every word he had said since entering. "Daniel Carter," he said, nothing more, no explanation, no title, just the name, delivered with a quiet certainty that carried further than any introduction could. The effect was immediate, though not loud, not explosive, but visible in the subtle reactions that moved through the room. The manager's eyes widening just enough to betray recognition, a customer near the display exchanging a quick glance with another, the faint intake of breath from someone who understood exactly who that name belonged to. And in that stillness, the weight of it settled completely. Victoria's face did not collapse, she did not step back, but the shift in her was unmistakable, the confidence that had once been effortless now requiring effort to maintain her. Earlier certainty replaced by something far more fragile, awareness. She knew the name, not from casual mention, but from the kind of circles where influence carried consequence, where decisions made in quiet rooms shaped entire industries. And for the first time since the moment began, she was no longer evaluating Emily, she was evaluating herself within the situation she had created. "I see," she said, though the words came more slowly now, her mind clearly moving faster than her voice, recalculating, reassessing, searching for a way to reposition herself without losing what remained of her control. Around them, the boutique had gone completely still again, not out of tension, but out of recognition that the balance had fully shifted, not just socially, but structurally, in a way that extended far beyond the walls of the room. Daniel did not press forward, did not emphasize his identity. He simply remained where he was, his presence steady, his gaze unwavering, allowing the reality of who he was to exist without explanation, and that restraint carried more weight than any display of power could have. Emily stood beside him, unchanged, her calm still intact, her role in the moment now understood in a way no one had seen at the beginning. And as the silence stretched once more, it became clear that whatever came next would not be about proving anything, but about facing the consequences of what had already been done. The weight of the name did not need to be repeated. It lingered in the air long after it was spoken, settling into every corner of the boutique, reshaping the space without a single raised voice. And Victoria felt it more than anyone, not as a shock, but as a slow, tightening realization that every word she had spoken moments earlier now stood exposed under a different light. She held her posture, but it was no longer effortless. Her shoulders squared not from confidence, but from control, her expression carefully maintained as she searched for something to say that could bridge the gap between what had happened and what could still be salvaged. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone measured, the sharpness gone, replaced with something more deliberate. "If there has been any misunderstanding, I would like to clarify." But the sentence did not complete itself with the same certainty it had started, because even as she spoke, she knew the moment had moved beyond clarification. Daniel did not interrupt her. He did not raise a hand or shift his stance. He simply listened, his expression unchanged, and when she paused, he responded with the same quiet precision that had defined every word he had spoken so far. "There is no need to reframe what happened," he said calmly, his voice steady, carrying just enough to reach everyone present without effort. "What matters is how it is acknowledged." The simplicity of the statement left no room for negotiation, and for the first time, Victoria's gaze dropped, not in defeat, but in recognition that the situation no longer belonged to her. Around them, the room remained completely still, no one pretending to browse, no one whispering. Every person present now fully aware that they were witnessing something that extended far beyond a single interaction. The manager stepped forward slightly, his earlier hesitation replaced by a careful urgency, his voice respectful, almost cautious. "Mr. Carter, we can address this immediately," he said, but Daniel's attention did not shift, his focus remaining on Victoria, because this was not about procedure, it was about accountability. Emily stood beside him, her composure unchanged, her presence steady, and though she had said very little, it was clear that everything unfolding now had been set into motion by her quiet decision to stand still rather than step back. Victoria inhaled slowly, the tension in her posture softening just enough to reveal what had been held beneath it, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, not weak, but stripped of the certainty it once carried. "I misjudged the situation," she said, each word deliberate, chosen with care, and though it was not a full apology, it was the closest she could come without losing what remained of her pride. Daniel regarded her for a brief moment, his expression unchanged, and then he nodded once, not in approval, but in acknowledgement, as if to mark that the truth had finally been spoken. "That is where it begins," he replied, his tone even, "not where it ends." The words settled into the silence with quiet finality, and no one moved to challenge them, because there was nothing left to challenge. The balance had already shifted, not through force, not through spectacle, but through clarity, and as the moment began to dissolve, as people slowly returned to their places and the room found its rhythm again, something remained, something that could not be undone or forgotten. Emily turned slightly, her calm presence unchanged, and as she walked toward the exit, Daniel beside her, no one stopped them, no one spoke, because the lesson had already been delivered without needing to be explained, and in the quiet that followed, the boutique no longer felt the same, not because of what had been said, but because of what had been revealed. And that day, without a single raised voice, everyone in that room understood something they would not easily forget. Respect is never determined by appearance, but by how one chooses to treat another when no one is expected to intervene.